This is topic 6.6, nuclear power for AP Environmental Science. Now at the top we have our learning targets, which we can also call learning goals or learning objectives. So the first one here that has the symbol at the end, the ENG, is the one from the course and exam description published by the College Board. The second learning target is a more specific learning target. All right, first thing to understand about nuclear power is that a lot of it is used for generating electricity. A lot of times students think, well, nuclear power is nuclear weapons, the bomb that ended World War II in Japan, the two bombs actually, the nuclear bombs. But really nuclear power nowadays is used to generate electricity and also to power naval ships. Okay, so generating electricity from nuclear fuel, which is uranium-235, is almost the same process as using coal or natural gas in a power plant. So you do need to make sure you understand that, or just memorize that the fuel used is uranium-235. The 235 is the particular isotope of uranium. Okay, so uranium and other nuclear fuels, but really we use uranium-235 in this process, is radioactive, so particles are emitted. You learned this in chemistry class, maybe some physics class. And so nuclear fission is the word fission in English means to break apart. And so these atoms are breaking apart. They're very unstable atoms. And we can use the power of this process to create heat, which heats water, which creates steam, which spins turbines and generates electricity in a generator. So the process is nuclear fission. Do not confuse it with nuclear fusion, which is something you no longer have to know for the AP Environmental Science test. So it's fission to break apart. By the way, nuclear fusion is how the sun gets its energy, and that's where you combine atoms. It's something we've only been able to do once in a lab, but it is a powerful energy source, but you don't have to know that for the AP test. But you do need to know fission, and so you can see here's a picture of nuclear fission. You can pause the video to take a look at this diagram in more detail. All right, so in a nuclear power plant, you have the core. We'll take a look at that, what that is in a little bit with another diagram. But the nuclear reactor, you have fuel rods and you have control rods. The fuel rods have the fuel, which is uranium-235, and the control rods make sure it doesn't go too fast or too slow, and they can stop the reaction if they're needed, etc. Now, nuclear power, you need to know, is non-renewable. It was made millions of years ago in the crust of the earth. And so we can't switch totally to nuclear for our energy use because it would only last about 20 years with the reserves of uranium that we have worldwide. Take a look at this diagram. You need to know diagrams for the AP test. In my class, we have packets of nuclear diagrams. Energy diagrams of all types, because often on an AP test, you'll see a diagram and have to know what happens in certain locations. So for nuclear power, if you look here, we've got steam, so water, steam, spinning turbines to a generator, and then you cool down the water. The difference with this from a coal or natural gas power plant is that here you have fission occurring. So you have your uranium here in the core, and the reaction occurs with the fuel rods and the control rods. So that's the difference. We don't light anything on fire. We don't do combustion. We start a chain reaction. All right, so on your study guide, you should fill in and summarize. If you want to, you can put everything down here, but pretty much summarize it and be able to know a couple of these advantages and a couple of disadvantages of nuclear power. So pause the video while you do that on your study guide. The big things to know is that there's no air pollution, there's no greenhouse gases. So this is huge. This is what some people who want to stop climate change think is a good stopgap. It's not a forever solution to burning fossil fuels because, again, uranium is a non-renewable resource, so we don't have infinite. We have a finite amount of uranium, and so that's a disadvantage. We also have possibilities of dangerous accidents, but if everything is built and monitored greatly, perfectly, we don't have accidents. So we'll talk about accidents in a little bit. Okay, so in my school, in biology class, we do learn a little bit, and in chemistry class and physics, a little bit about half-life and radioactive decay. And so there's this graph here that shows you the number of half-lives. So in one half-life, it goes down to 50% of the original, 2 half-lives, 25%, at 3 half-lives is 12.5%, etc., all the way down. And so this is called radioactive decay, where it's spontaneous release of material from the nucleus. Now, I talked about half-life, the time it takes for half of the original to decay. And using half-life measurements allow us to determine the safety of radioactive nuclear waste. If you learn this in biology, we talk about half-life to help us understand how we date fossils. So there are certain types of rocks that emit particles, and if we know that the fossil is embedded in these rocks and we can measure how much is left of a certain material, we know that we can measure approximately the age of the rocks and the age of the fossils. All right, so one of the drawbacks with nuclear waste is what do we do with the waste? Sorry, nuclear energy is what do we do with the waste? So nuclear waste is fuel that can no longer produce enough heat to be useful, but is still radioactive. So you don't want to be around it. Even if we can't use it anymore for nuclear power plants, it doesn't emit enough heat for it. We still have to put it somewhere, and this is a huge problem with nuclear power. So you can see here it's stored in a cave underground. Currently at nuclear power plants, the spent fuel rods is what we call them, are stored on site at the location. Now, Congress a few years ago, 20 years ago, they voted in that they were going to put all nuclear waste inside tunnels in a mountain in Nevada called Yucca Mountain. But that is still technically what Congress voted, but no work is being done because Nevada's fighting it. They don't want all this nuclear waste in their state. And so really no work has been done in a couple of decades. So people don't think it's actually really going to happen. So currently, what you have to know for the AP test and my exam is that nuclear waste is stored at the location of the nuclear power plant. Now, radiation causes thyroid cancer. Thyroid is right here in your neck, and it regulates your metabolism. So the specific type of cancer from nuclear accidents and radiation is thyroid cancer. Do not, on an AP test, put just cancer. You need to put the specific type of cancer, which is thyroid cancer. And mostly fetuses is unborn children when a mom's pregnant. Children and adolescents, so teenagers, are the most vulnerable to this. All right. On the AP test, you don't really have to know what a becquerel or a curie is. If you have half-life problems, most likely you're just going to have one like this where you sketch it out. We'll do more energy math where you practice these types of problems. You don't have to plug in a formula in a calculator. You have to sort of sketch out the problem. And we'll do that math together and to learn how to do it. But the units, you can see this unit is curies, but you're just using it in the math. You don't have to convert or kind of know what it means or anything like that for our test. Just be able to use it within the math question. All right, so Typically, spent fuel rods remain a threat to human health for about 10 or more half-lives. Long-term storage should be considered when making nuclear power plants. It has been considered, but nothing has really been done about it. Storage methods range from water storage to lead-lined containers, depending on the power plant. You cannot incinerate, that means light it on fire, because you're going to spread in the smoke and ashes radioactive waste to millions of people probably. You can't destroy it with chemicals, you can't shoot it into space, you can't bury it into the ocean. Any of those are not safe. I mean, you can do them, but they're not safe and not a good solution. So we want to store our waste in a place that doesn't leach into groundwater, it doesn't escape, it doesn't be exposed to the environment, which is why they picked Yucca Mountain in Nevada, which is right here. It was intended to be a long-term storage site, abandoned in 2010 due to political pressures, and we don't have a replacement. All right, you do have to know the 3 major nuclear accidents that occurred in the past. The first one is 3 Mile Island, which is Pennsylvania, and it's a partial meltdown because a water pump failed. So nowadays, nuclear power plants are built with overriding functions so that if a water pump fails or there's human error, it will automatically correct the problem against human error. Chernobyl was human error. Humans in the control rooms did not, they ignored like warning signals like beep, 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 there's a problem. And they're like, nah, it's not really a problem. And they ignored it. So you ended up with an explosion. It is the worst one. So if you have to know which one's the worst one, it's Chernobyl, 1986. And that was an explosion. That picture's right here. You can see the exploded area of Chernobyl. It's all shut off too, so nobody lives in that area anymore. And then in Fukushima, Japan, you had a earthquake that triggered a tsunami. The tsunami flooded the nuclear power plant and 3 reactors melted down due to the flooding, and that was in 2010. All right, so some questions to know. First of all, where does nuclear fusion occur? It's in the reactor, and that's what this looks like. This is a nuclear reactor in a power plant. This is also where accidents occur, and you need to know the worst one was Chernobyl. It was at the time in 1986 when it happened, it was in the Soviet Union, which is USSR's the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union fell apart in about 1990. And so Ukraine is now the country that was formed after the Soviet Union fell apart. And it's in Ukraine. Okay, what happened at Fukushima? So more specifics. A tsunami flooded the nuclear power in Japan, which stopped the cooling process. So it heated up, and you had some explosions and nuclear meltdowns. Okay, neither of these pictures are that process. These 2 pictures goes with the next question. What are the harmful effects of thermal pollution to ecosystem? Remember, range of tolerance from Unit 2 and dissolved oxygen. So here's the answer. Nuclear power plants and other power plants, not just nuclear, they cool their reactors with water. The water heats up. Also, they boil the water to make steam to spin turbines. They gotta cool the water down before they use it again. If they're right next to a body of water, they use the body of water to cool the water down. Well, it makes the body of water really hot, and we call that type of pollution thermal pollution. This is a satellite image. So this is the nuclear power plant, and it's discharged into the ocean. And you can see here, this area is much hotter than the surrounding ocean water. So you're going to have the area here out of the range of tolerance for many species. Also, it's a physical property of water that hotter water holds less dissolved oxygen. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen. So you do need to know that for the AP test. So when you have hotter water, you're going to have less dissolved oxygen to support less aquatic life. All right, again, to reiterate, because these are the types of questions you may see on the AP test, where's nuclear waste currently stored? At the individual power plant, not Yucca Mountain. So don't pick Yucca Mountain. It's at the individual power plant. The good thing about nuclear energy, there's no greenhouse gases, no air pollution. In the pictures, you see the emissions is water vapor. It's not any other gases. We cannot replace fossil fuels in the long term because uranium is finite, which means there's a limited amount and it's non-renewable. All right, that is it for topic 6.6.